Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the way in which the Conservative government, and that doesn't just mean Boris Johnson's government, have continually refused to heed the strongest scientific and medical advice in preparing for and managing the coronavirus pandemic. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, a few years ago, a government minister, Michael Gove, denounced experts in a ploy to sell Brexit to the British people because, of course, there was never any serious debate about Brexit amongst people who knew what it would do. Experts in all related fields were against it. And so the only chance for success for Brexiteers was to persuade people that they were sick of experts. Oh, don't listen to them. You're sick of them. They're always talking down at you, they said. Listen, ignore them completely and they'll go away. But as I always said, you might persuade people to ignore experts on political matters. If you have an actual expert economist, people will watch them debate with Nigel Farage or Michael Gove, who know nothing about economics, and they'll somehow call that a debate. But someone breaks their leg, or someone they love suffers from pneumonia, would they rather talk to a doctor or a political pundit? Because when it comes to something that people see as actually affecting their life, they will pick the expert every single time. Every single time. No question about it. They don't want Nigel Farage to give them any advice on pneumonia or a broken leg. No, I'll have a doctor if you don't mind. The COVID pandemic is not a political invention like Brexit. People see it as clearly affecting their lives and the lives of their loved ones. And do you know what? They want the experts. They want the experts. They want to know that the government have followed the scientific advice, as ministers initially claimed, falsely, to be doing. Now the government have been so emboldened that they don't even have to pretend to follow the scientific advice. They're quite happy to say, no, we're making the decisions. Yeah, we're listening to the experts, but we have to act in what we think is the best way. And but they don't want to be seen to be ignoring the advice completely, especially when the consequences are proving to be so horrific. Now, those of us who've been observing this clown show with a critical eye will have noted that the expert advice to government was to lock down 2 weeks earlier than we did in spring. The delay, according to the government's own scientific team, SAGE, cost quite a lot of lives. The government were also advised to shield vulnerable care home residents. They did not. Another load of lives lost, about 20,000 in that case. And it needs to be remembered, for all the talks of how well the likes of New Zealand have done, there are countries with larger populations than the UK, more densely populated nations than the UK, that were hit earlier and coped better. South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, barely mentioned in reference to the pandemic because they've done so well in managing it. Doesn't really make the news when things are going quite well there, relatively speaking. Nothing we are experiencing was inevitable. It was caused by Conservative government and their refusal to do what they were told by experts in an emergency, a medical emergency, a real emergency, not a political one. It's like one of those ridiculous apocalyptic films, those science movies you have to watch sometimes, where some great catastrophe unfolds and then it becomes much worse because the politician did not listen to the scientist who was warning about it from the very start. Never again will I be able to describe that premise as unrealistic. A few years ago, the UK government famously carried out a simulation into the impact of a deadly viral pandemic. The operation was known as Operation Cygnus. Much of the findings have been kept secret. Few of the recommendations were implemented. But it is certain that it is being kept secret because the government know that publication of the report will show that what is happening right now could have been avoided if we paid attention to the experts and the lessons they gave of this exercise Cygnus that our own government authorised. It wasn't a separate exercise. It wasn't something that an independent group did. The government actually wanted this operation to be carried out. They got the report. They paid for the report, read the report and thought, oh my God. Are we going to do anything about it? Looks like it might cost money. Now, the Information Commissioner's Office are now ordering the Department of Health to release the report or to explain why it should not publish it. by October the 23rd, later this month. Now, a former Conservative minister, who was a Conservative minister at the time of Operation Cygnus and will know something about it, but is now a member of the Liberal Democrats, Philip Lee, has said that Cygnus made it clear that the government needed to act quickly. And it also has to be noted that a viral pandemic has been listed by the UK government as the #1 threat to the nation for 10 years now. This Conservative government has accepted for a decade that a global viral pandemic is the #1 threat to this nation. Not the EU, not terrorists, certainly not refugees in rubber dinghies, but a viral pandemic. It was reported earlier this year, and has again since, that those involved in Cygnus believe that the report was never published properly because the results were too terrifying, too horrific. In other words, it painted a picture of a nation wholly unequipped to deal with such an event. Now, you can sort of understand a government not wanting to publish it at the time for fear of causing panic, but then to use the time to implement the recommendations, by which time you then authorise another simulation, verify that we are now prepared, then you can publish the reports. And you can say, look, we did this, we took it all on board, we managed the situation, and now we're well prepared for it. We could have done that. That was a possibility. We chose not to. It would have been a lot cheaper. It would have saved us a lot of money. When the post-mortem eventually is done on this, and at some point it will have to be, at some point we will no longer have this government. We will no longer have a government whose interest it is to keep this suppressed. There will at some point be an account, and all of this will then come out. Will be too late then, of course. And the report was also made available to ministers several years ago. This is the important bit. They had 3 years to implement the recommendations, and they refused. It's not just that they didn't do it well enough. They actually refused. They made a decision, a political decision, not to implement the recommendations. And they continue to refuse. Even given that the government did nothing to prepare us for this, presumably consumed by Brexit or some other harmful ideology, they still could have come out of this with a bit of credit by listening to the advice when the full reality dawned on us that the pandemic was no longer a top threat, but actually here to show it why it was considered the #1 threat. Over half a year ago, Boris Johnson locks down too late. He refused to lock down. When he did lock down, he failed to shield care homes. When we had the summer respite, when we'd gone past the first wave, he failed to implement an effective test, trace and isolate programme. He knew how to do it. He was told how to do it. He did the opposite. As we were getting ready to open up schools and colleges, scientific advisors were urging the government to close something down to compensate. We know this. This was publicly stated. If you just open up schools and don't close anything else down, they said, the number of cases will skyrocket. The R value at the time was believed to be below 1 across the country, not necessarily in all parts of the country, but across the UK. But we didn't have the capacity for the epic level of social mixing that opening up schools and colleges would bring without compensating somewhere else by, for example, closing down pubs. I even reported on this myself. Like I said, this was public knowledge that the government's advisors were advising the government of this. This was back in August. The government ignored those advisors, that advice from those advisors, so the consequences warned by the advisors came to pass. The number of cases skyrocketed. They then urged the government, right, you've lost control, we need to lock down again. This was weeks ago. Yet again, Boris Johnson has tried to apply a political compromise to a serious medical emergency. As if he's negotiating with the experts, as if it's a negotiating table. Okay, you want this. I get that, right? This is your starting position. I understand. That's how negotiations work. But I'll tell you what, I'll do this instead. It's not really what I want. It's not what, but it's a compromise which will suit both sides, yeah? But that's not what scientific advice is. It isn't a negotiating position. They don't go to the Prime Minister and say, right, well, we'll call for this. We know he won't give us everything we want. So we'll call for something that's harder than that's needed. And then what he'll give us will be good enough. No, they're telling the government what to do to avert a disaster. If we do not follow that advice, we do not avert the disaster. It's as simple as that. This week, Boris Johnson agreed to tighter measures. His advisors told him weeks ago to tell everyone who can to work from home. That he reluctantly did. After they told him to, there was still a significant delay, but he reluctantly agreed to that measure. Even then, he didn't present it in a strong message. It was a mere suggestion. He was now suggesting that people should work from home if it's possible to do so, which still allows brainless managers the wriggle room to pull in workers who do not need to go into the office and do not want to go into the office. But they also told him to ban household mixing in homes, to close all bars, restaurants, cafes, indoor gyms and services such as hairdressers. They told him to have all university and college teaching be online, done remotely, unless this was impossible. Some courses, obviously there's a heavy practical element, like for medical students, for example, okay. But where it could be done, should be done. None of this was done. Even in the highest tier of restrictions announced this week, which is still too late, the tier 3 does not adopt those measures. The only measure it adopts is closing pubs and, leisure centres, gyms. None of the other measures are in there at all, even in the highest level of measures. And these measures were being called for the whole of England, not just a few regions, not just where it's worst, everywhere. It's bad everywhere, they were saying. Even if Johnson had put this in place, and again, if he'd have put it in place when they asked for it, it would not have needed to have been for as long as it's now going to have to be. But even if he'd have announced that this week, it would still have been a lot later than they called for it, which means it would need to go on for longer. That's why our original lockdown, it came too late, had to be put in place for longer. The experts keep trying to get it through to thick heads. Delays are fateful. And it's easy to see why, because if you look at the figures, at the point at which I'm doing this, the average number of new cases per day in the UK is 14,589. A week ago, it was 9,960. That is an increase of 46% in a week. We are in the exponential growth of cases again. Even a day's delay is very costly. It doesn't just go up by a bit. And we still haven't acted. We still aren't doing what is advised by those who know how to manage this crisis. They must have the patience of saints to keep having their advice ignored, only to take stock again and offer further advice. I'd have told Johnson to piss off months ago and resigned. What we have here is a government stretching back years under two different prime ministers who have failed to take the number one threat to the nation, as they have acknowledged themselves, seriously. They continue to refuse to take it seriously, even when the threat has arrived and bared its teeth. And so I go back to the news that the Information Commissioner is pursuing the release of the Cygnus report, which the government are resisting. That will be a long process, because I can almost guarantee that come October the 23rd, they will not have published the report, and they will not have come up with a good reason for not doing so. So if this process of getting the report published is ever successful, all it will mean is that all it can possibly do is show us exactly who is responsible here. Who is responsible? Who has caused all this? More proof that we have been deliberately failed, because it is increasingly unlikely that we will ever manage this situation, and certainly won't manage it this winter. So this winter is going to be an absolute clown show. Because what is needed to deal with the virus, it's fairly obvious now, is not what Boris Johnson finds politically acceptable. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.